Beverly, let's see what we do, or Paul. Okay, thank you. Let's see what we can do. Okay, well, welcome to the plenary dialogue on use of evaluation. We had a very interesting day, and we have a very busy session, but a very important step forward. I would like to call some of our discussants to join me here, and then I'll proceed to explain a little bit about the process and the model we've been using and where we come from and where we want to get. Okay? So I would like to call Mr. Jimmy Kawaye from Malawi, Program Coordinator for Development Effectiveness and Accounting Program of Ministry of Economic Planning and Development. Where is he? Not here yet? Yes, there you go. Okay. Mr. Agustín Escobar from Mexico, Evaluation Expert from the Consejo Nacional de Evaluación de la Política de Desarrollo Social. Madame Ivett Subero from Dominican Republic, Director of UN System Monitoring and Multilateral Cooperation. Office of DIGECOOM, Ministry of Economy. And Mr. Paulo Januzzi, I think we might have to get him outside. Januzzi, our keynote speaker of today. I think he's still there in the room if somebody can get him. Okay, so we'll wait for him to arrive. But in the meanwhile, let me explain a little bit of what we had so far. As you can see, we started with some information from the keynote speakers, and then we moved to the solution exchange forums. The idea is really to try to get you to engage around specific questions that we can bring to the end of this every day and the end of this conference with some concrete proposals of how we can commit to the use and the promotion of credible and independent evaluations. So I think we can start with calling some of the moderators, some of the facilitators, the volunteer facilitators that helped in each of the solution forums, so they can quickly brief us on what happened. But just to give you a brief understanding of why we started with the theme of use of evaluation. As you know, our last conference in 2009 in South Africa was about the use of evaluation. That's where we focused on. So we thought it was important to start from where we finished and then move from there and see how to promote and ensure use of evaluation. We need to think of also about credibility, and to be credible, to have credible evaluations, we need to consider independent evaluations. So the plan is really to try to get to the end of this conference, really bringing up where we finished in South Africa, how we moved here in Brazil through use of evaluation, what commitments we will reach here, and then move to go to credibility and then independence by the end of the conference. We see that a lot has been discussed already in terms of our main question being what are the specific capacity development needs to promote use of evaluation. And so far, it's been clear from the papers and some of the discussions and the presentations that we need to develop capacity for the demanders, the people demanding, the institutions demanding evaluations. We need to develop capacity for the commissioners of evaluation, for the managers of evaluation, and as well as the evaluators, the people conducting these evaluations. But most of all, we also need to consider that we need to develop the capacity of the users of evaluation. So how we go about doing that is what we've discussed a little bit in these solution forums, and that our facilitators are going to bring to us. And then we're going to move to our discussants in the plenary and exchange with you some a bit more a few other ideas on how to support and how to promote the use of evaluation. Also, I would like to ask the past participants from South Africa or the countries that were represented in the conference in 2011 to be prepared to also tell us a little bit about, in the end of this session, of what has changed since 2011. Well, given that we had this discussion 2 years ago, where have we got so far and how far we still need to go. But so I'm going to call first my colleague Inka Matila, the evaluation advisor from UNDP, Latin American Caribbean Regional Bureau, to give us a brief overview of her discussion in her solution forum.
Thank you, Anna. Very briefly, basically in our group we have the theme of use and the potential links for innovation or innovative solution in use of evaluations. Basically we started the discussion, we identified some common challenges, and basically the one common issue that came up from the keynote speakers that we had from Brazil, from Bhutan and from Afghanistan was related to the need to foster or certain kind of lack of evaluation culture. When we started to dig a bit more, what does evaluation culture mean, is basically to see how to really get the different stakeholders and especially the government involved and participate in the evaluation processes. What we saw in the practice that many times evaluations are still very ad hoc. They require more on accountability demands, and this also obviously limits to great extent their use. One common issue of the countries was also the lack or at least the need to foster the institutional setup, meaning policy, meaning mechanism, meaning backup system evaluation, and also to come up with good evaluation systems, good monitoring practices, the whole issue of mandate and the roles and responsibilities. This was like the global setup from the experiences and the keynote speakers. Basically in the solution table, when we started to track what could be the measures, what kind of issues we should put attention to, one of the big issues that came out in the table was related how to create demand for evaluations inside the public institution and also in the society in more general terms. And obviously, for example, in case of Bhutan came out the whole issue and the initiatives of the voluntary organizations that do and might have very important role in that process. In many cases, what many of the discussion groups actually came out was quite basic issues. Many times we are not sure for what we have the evaluation, for what we need the evaluations in the first place. And obviously, in many cases, we start to maybe even target the evaluation users afterwards, not in the first place. So obviously, these two issues are something that comes up to, that we came in many of the discussion groups back to the planning. So basically, we need to plan for monitoring. We need to plan for monitoring systems that support good quality evaluations in longer sense. And obviously, how to link this into the vision. For example, over here we had the whole issue of the Bhutan case and the national target to reach a happiness in the country. So basically, how you really link the monitoring evidence to really contribute to the key national objectives and expected development results. This led also the discussion on the whole evaluability issues. We need to really assure we have the data and the data production mechanisms we need. And obviously we identified in the groups there's a great risk in complex data generation systems that actually produce data just in case, not necessarily in the most timely and opportune manner. And about the data issue, there's obviously great room of innovation. How we can really come up with data systems in the planning place that support evaluation function in a timely and responsive manner. And obviously for the whole innovation issue, this is one of the key messages. The other issue that came up in many of the groups, the discussion table, was the whole issue of the communication. Not communication as communication, but how we communicate evaluative evidence, how we communicate the evaluation recommendation. And obviously this led to whole discussion of the need to user-friendly communication. simple communication, and also take into account the language, not only how we communicate, but also the different languages in the countries. This is really a big issue in the different regions that were involved in the discussions of the table. And obviously, this is key means how to get the buy-in of all stakeholders, and obviously they need to build on the sustainability and ownership of the governments, but also work widely with actors as parliament, civil society, and take into account actors like media. One of the key challenges, and actually that was something that can be quite easily tackled, is the whole issue, what is evaluation? Evaluation is not monitoring, it's not audit, it's really methodological, rigorous process, and there's still like a lot of issues in the countries that were presented on the clear understanding what is evaluation. To end up, basically, another means that came out on the groups were the whole issue of the need to institutionalize evaluation. Examples like Mexico, where you have in the constitution obligation to really do an evaluation to assess if you want to continue a policy, came up as one possible mechanism, and obviously this might be a practice that can be applied somewhere else, or can be an experience that might be applied in certain kind of more modified manner. The whole issue of follow-up mechanisms, what happens the next day? The day after a question. Basically, once we get the evaluations, how we really practice the evaluation recommendations. There were implications of if there's possibilities to form certain kind of commissions, specialized commissions, or even simple mechanisms like management responses or these kind of tools. The whole issue that how we really can foster evaluation in public management and the whole public system to feed into the plans, the policy making, the planning, the programs, and the budgeting. The link between budget and evaluation was a big question, and obviously key incentive question also for the use of evaluations. Obviously, the evaluations to be used, they need to be public as possible, and we need to think about the public we want to reach. So this has to do with the formats we are using for the evaluation information and evidence. And obviously we need to think that there's different kind of users and different kind of audiences for evaluations, and this needs to be taken into account in the design of the same evaluations. As an underlying condition, we identified the whole issue of the political will and the right incentives to foster the use of evaluation, and obviously the whole subject of the conference, which is the link between credibility, independence, and use of evaluations. Thank you.
Thank you, Inka. Thank you. Very interesting. All right, I'm going to move quickly to the other group. I'm going to call Mr. Fidel Arevalo from Guatemala, and I'm going to ask that you really try to give us some sense of some of the commitments and agreements that you were able to discuss in your group. You know, what kind of demands and what kind of offers were there, so we can really try to move the dialogue in the direction of a South-South solution environment, a South-South cooperation, in a sense that we really have to identify the main demands in these forums, and really some of the providers, some of potential providers and interested cooperators, so we can move ahead. So please, Mr. Fidel, if you can help us with that.
Thank you. This is going to be really quick, not as Inka said before. Sorry. We were asked just to summarize and to select some very key specific points or issues, and 5 minutes, that's they say, and I would like to address that very difficult question. I hope I understand. And the first thing is that in the group that rise was the needs for legislation. So some of the even though some countries have their own legislation in regards of policy and some systems, there is a huge challenge for improvement of the laws or to create the laws which enforce the systems and to push the systems as well to use the information and to use evaluations as a tool for improving the policy and improving the programs and improving the budget management. The second point that raised was the need for increase the credibility of the evaluations. So this is some of the things that the evaluators has to discuss, and this is some that the issues that we put in the table to discuss, and what the credibility, increasing the credibility may increase the use of evaluation data. The third point was the understanding of evaluation by the stakeholders. So sometimes we discuss in the groups that the evaluations may design under the umbrella of the institutions, and the stakeholders are usually government institutions and private sector, but normally the beneficiaries are not involved in the creation of or designing of indicators, and this will be a challenge to, as the presenter this morning of the experience of Brazil, of reading the letters from the customers. This will be a challenge of create a new sort of indicators which reflect what the needs of population or feelings of population may be addressed with the policies. And the fourth one is we were asked to give some examples, and we select one from India, which is a very long process. I couldn't be able to describe, which is a very long process, creating some specific groups of stakeholders, defining the indicators, and then to analyze the information, and then to get back to the government and try to rise from some issues that should be addressed and correct or something. And then, as I spoke with the lady who presented this example, the challenge was that not all the recommendations were carried on in the way that the evaluation was suggesting. And the other was an example from South Africa, which is quite similar to the Indian, but this is needs more than 5 minutes to explain it, so I hope I can finish. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have here our last exchange forum. I call Mr. Swazam Machuka, Director of Monitoring and Evaluation and Operations from Kenya's National Monitoring and Evaluation Systems. Mr. Machuka?
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon. This last group came up with some 4 critical imperatives in addressing the issues of how evaluations have to be hastened in most countries where we come from. And I want you, in the first instance, to appreciate that evaluations are normally resisted because people do not want it to be checked. They just want things to happen the way they happen. Now, the 4 critical areas we focused on are categorized into policy frameworks, mechanisms to engage users, institutional and individual capacities, and lastly, incentives for greater use. On the issues of policy frameworks, and I'm very happy that the other 2 presentations have touched on policy, we realize that in most cases where policy lacks, then there is obviously lack of incentive to implement evaluation policies. And therefore, developing evaluation policy is critical. It's critical because citizens need to be guided by a policy framework. But we are again saying that even when you develop a policy, you don't stop there. you go to the next level and enact it, make it into law. Because policies normally are reversed by new government systems compared to laws. And if policies are well executed, and I want to give you an example of Kenya, we are actually at the policy level. We want to move to the act level. And in the policy, we are saying that evaluations will continue to be informing government of what they are supposed to do. So by implementing the policy per se, then people's use of information becomes critical. We are also saying in the policy that 1% of the resources be allocated for evaluation work. Now, on the issue of mechanisms to engage users, we are saying that here you need to have what we call multi-stakeholder forums, where you share information, not just as government, but you need to involve, as it came out in the morning, you need to involve parliamentarians, you need to involve civil society organizations, so that even when you are implementing, when you are doing evaluations, then it is one understood by all stakeholders. Then the other aspect which we are talking about is institutional and individual capacities. And here we are saying that when evaluations are being done, let them be guided by minimum standards of skill levels. You don't have to do evaluations even when you are not trained on what evaluation is. So we are saying that people must be exposed to minimum training programs. And then, of course, you can continue beyond the minimum training programs. We do not want people to do evaluations which have double standards or which can bring out different interpretations or different findings. So we wanted that when evaluations are done, they are done in an harmonized or understood mechanism. And we are saying that even the NGOs, who we are saying are normally critical of government, they need to criticize what they also understand. You don't just, sometimes NGOs criticize things they don't understand. We want them to have the knowledge that is necessary for them to criticize that whatever the government is evaluating is not correct, based on the minimum training programs. Then the other aspect that I want to finish with is incentives for greater use. We need to have, I've already talked about short-term training programs. People must be trained, not just getting skills, but also changing their attitudes, because I think attitude is very, very, very important. Then there is also a need that those countries, because I know countries are not at the same level, countries are at different levels. Those countries who have not even started evaluations be given a roadmap so that they can be able to reach where those other countries which have done evaluations are, so that they can then be able to have a legislative framework for evaluations. Then we also need to have opportunities and for collaboration with the key stakeholders who are actually who should be part of the country systems who are undertaking evaluations. I think, I don't know whether I left anything, but generally speaking, those are the issues the forum for Group 1 came up with. Thank you very much.
Okay, so until we get the other microphones working, thank you very much. I think we had a great start. We have some demands identified. We need to move on some concrete actions that we can commit together, but I think we have... Huh? Yes, exactly. We absolutely have concrete actions, but we now need to commit as a group or as partners, bilateral or multilateral, on how to move ahead. And we'll certainly do this in the next couple of days. But before we move into this dialogue, I just wanted to recap on a few items that weren't mentioned yet, that were mentioned in the last conference. Some of the things that we brought here today, such as, for example, the evaluation policy. There's a lot of demand or a lot of expectations and talk about how it could be very important and necessary to have an evaluation policy to move ahead. The discussion last year wasn't exactly clear about how to move ahead with this. It wasn't very, there was an agreement that every country was at a level able to move ahead and have an evaluation policy. Others were confused about whether having one would mean implementing one. So this is where we left off in 2011 about this conversation on having a policy. It wasn't very clear whether we should have or not, but it's something that we definitely, every country should consider and then decide what's best and when is the most appropriate moment. The other aspect was linked to the increase of in credibility. You know, to promote more use of evaluation, that could be linked to increasing credibility, enhancing credibility of evaluations. And that wasn't also very clear from the last conference. There was discussion that there is a lack of demand regardless of the quality of the evaluations in some of the countries. It was also clear that in some countries, to increase that credibility, they were already considering accreditation of evaluators. So these were some of the themes that were raised in the last conference that you just brought here today as well. And the aspect of making it public, to promote the use of evaluation, it would be very important to make not only the recommendations and the evidences and the conclusions of evaluations public, but it was also very important to make the management responses public. You know, once you have it out there, what has an institution, a government, or a project or program agreed to change, to move, to improve, and that also would promote the use of evaluation. In a way, this was what was brought in the last conference about some of the issues that you raised so far. But if the microphone is working, is it? Okay, I would like to move to our dialogue here with our discussants. And before I can open to the rest of the colleagues, I would like to hear from our colleagues here. What have you seen and experienced that helped enhance use of evaluation? And what are some of the capacities needed to promote and to ensure the use of evaluations?
Just checking again so I get the question clear. I think from Malawi experience, it's one of the issues has already been mentioned, the framework. Once we have the framework in place, for example, we have the National M&E Master Plan, which clarifies the structures. And one of the structures that is key in our operation in terms of use of evaluation is the sector working groups, which groups together the development partners, the government, the civil society, and private sector. In that context, what happens is that mechanism is able to deliver the national strategy. At the same time, they're able to schedule reviews and evaluations. In the sense, it brings out the need for every year or at a regular basis to conduct evaluations. So first is the structure that you need to put in place. Of course, at the other end is to make sure that you create demand deliberately at a higher level where the senior political figures do chair meetings that look at the results of the evaluations so that they become part of the system within the government. I think I would start from that sense, yeah.
Bueno, puedo decir en nuestro caso en República Dominicana, discúlpenme que hable en español, pero mucho más fácil para mí. Me uno al comentario de muchos de mis colegas que me fueron antecesores. En República Dominicana también estamos en pañales en el caso de las evaluaciones.
We are also dealing with the evaluations, the serious evaluations we know have been supported by the international cooperation and they have even financed by the international cooperation. And for us to talk about something slightly different, which is somewhat of a concern, is actually the cost of evaluations. I believe the cost has actually allowed many institutions not to be able to include serious evaluations in their budgets, because an evaluation may be $1 million. It's an extremely high cost when our institutions do not even have the necessary budget for their common expenses. So I also think that these high costs, or maybe the methodologies that are being used, which may be a challenge, we need to look for methodologies that are not that expensive for our countries. So I think that then, and only then, our institutions and governments will be able to consider credible and independent evaluations.
Thank you very much. And I thank the two persons before me for taking a load off my shoulders. I would say that there are three main ingredients, and two have been very clearly discussed, but I think the third one hasn't. Firstly, legitimacy. And I'll be talking about legitimacy a little bit more tomorrow, especially about how you can or might create an independent body of evaluation, which might be believed by both society and the government, and that is one trick. The second one, of course, is quality. If you have good stuff there, then people will tend to believe it and use it far more than if you don't. But I would say that the magic of use in this case, and the element that has not been sufficiently emphasized, is what I would call alignment, or putting the incentives together. And this is, I think, the hard thing to do, but it is absolutely necessary. You need to convince everyone, and this includes both the public and public officials, that an evaluation is not an audit by another name, that it is, on the other hand, it is a diagnosis, a rigorous study of a public policy that promises to help that policy to improve. If you do that, then you get people together. You won't get them all together all of the time, of course, but you will be able to get many of them together and work together. And in order to do that, Mexico has tried lots of things, but to make it short, I would say Mexico has tried, at least several state governments in Mexico have tried what I call the hard way, putting in place a law that mandates public officials to use the recommendations, and if they don't use them, then they get punished. That law has been in place, and it is still in place, and the only way you can solve that law is by firing the Independent Evaluation Committee. Because there comes a place in which evaluators become too powerful, public officials feel too threatened, they start hiding evidence, they start trying to blacklist evaluators. It really becomes very difficult. So the hard way, I would say at least, I don't know if it works, but in Mexico it hasn't worked. There's also the soft way. You can mandate doing evaluations and then saying, well, you use them, you'll see how you use them. And that tends to underemphasize the importance of evaluations. For example, I've seen a number of ministers sending the most junior official to meet with evaluators and with the evaluation body because evaluations are not important. So you end up with evaluations that have very poor information and probably don't do any good to anybody. That's the soft way. And I would say the third one is the way to emphasize incentives, to emphasize the common incentives in better knowledge about public policy. And I would say that's the way we are trying to move forward in Mexico. Whether or not we are very far forward, I don't know, but in the Mexican context, I think that we have moved forward. First, we were able to convince the finance ministry that they needed information like the one evaluations provided. And so programs simplified the reporting because now they report just once to finance and to other bodies. Secondly, Congress did the same thing. Once you trust the knowledge in evaluations, then the other power will also believe in them and use them against the other. It's very funny because you have both finance and Congress discussing about the same thing with the same information. And that's interesting. Thirdly, we had evaluations that were 500 pages long. Now we mandate that executive summaries and yearly evaluations, which you could call monitoring, are only 8 pages long. And now for the first time in Mexican history, I mean, congressmen and women are reading evaluations every year, which didn't happen before. That's very simple, but it's very important. Next, we have user surveys. Both evaluators and public officials gave us very widely differing marks during the first years of existence of the Mexican Evaluation Council. Some were extremely angry, especially those in the powerful ministries. But we have listened to them through surveys, and now increasingly they give us good marks, both the evaluators and the public officials. So I would say that these are some of the elements that have led us to convince many people out there that evaluations serve to improve policy and to distance ourselves from the auditing, the ministry in charge of auditing and of controlling public dialogue. Among other things, this has allowed the programs and the actions that are under direct surveillance of CONEVAL to go from those comprising only 12% of the total budget in 2006 to 35% of the total budget now. Of course, we look at all public policy, but we don't make specific recommendations to all public policy. We only make it to 35%. But that's basically 3 times as much as what we started with. And yes, you need to have, just like my colleague said, evaluations that can be managed by the public sector. So the yearly simple evaluations in Mexico only cost about $5,000–6,000. But of course that does go up to about $5–6 million for some others. But you need to have a common basis. If you don't have a common basis, then you'll do very unfair things to some programs because they have come forward with an evaluation and they will be punished. And that's something that you don't want to have.
Thank you very much. We got some very interesting experiences here. I'm sure there are many questions and many comments that I want to be able to incorporate in this session. It's very important that we keep the dialogue mode. But before I move to the rest of the colleagues, I want to ask one more question. The same question I will ask the rest of the colleagues to also comment on, which is what can participants in this conference commit in regards to use of evaluations? What can we do individually as institutions, but also collectively as partners, bilaterally or multilaterally, in promoting and ensuring the use of evaluation?
Bueno, muy brevemente, creo que nuestros países deben impulsar el que
Our countries should actually try to include the evaluations in our legislation. In our case, although we have a very small country, in our national development strategy that we started putting forth since January 1st of last year, we included already the obligatoriness to have an evaluation assessment. And although this is a system which is just beginning and it's not been implemented fully, we have asked for advisory to the UNDP. And I think that this is a big step. These steps are usually very slow in institutions that usually have no resources. And also that if we propose in this law that we initially, in this project that is in the hands of the Ministry for Planning and Development, it will be a good thing, although we are not certain about its independence. And if the Ministry for Planning and Development, we understand that there are certain things that we still need to define. And if we create a new institution that's fully independent to actually bring this project forth.
I think from me, 3 points I would propose. The first one could be the focus on the systems improvement. Particularly when you talk about evaluation, you should talk about the need to improve the systems in terms of the delivery of the development plans. The second one, I would say there are a number of opportunities around at the moment. There's new philosophy about results-based management. If we take that, because everyone believes in it, the development partners, the civil societies, including our governments, and we put in the proper context, everyone will be interested in the evaluation. But also we can look at the aid effectiveness element or development effectiveness. This is the kind of thinking that can easily influence locally where we come from in terms of putting in place the evaluation systems. That's the new thinking, that everyone thinking within that line, and we should have the easier support. Of course, my colleague talked about the funding. But when we try to use the administrative data in terms of the evaluation activities, the cost of doing an evaluation is relatively cheaper than when you rely on the survey. So also try to look at the non-survey based kind of evaluations. I think these are the few issues I could propose that we can look at to start the evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is, I hope, not asking what everybody else can commit to, but maybe what we can commit to. I would say that some very specific things that have worked for us fairly well is to put in place a mechanism for the production of letters of commitment. And this is a mechanism which is, as I was saying in my classification, on the soft side. So we leave most of the choice of improvements that can be made, of feasible improvements, within the ministries themselves. And they produce a letter of commitment each year, and every following year we go back and they have to report exactly what they have done. In this very simple evaluation that we do every year, there is a short paragraph describing exactly what was achieved on the basis of those recommendations. And just in case they forget to do the most important things, every 5 years we go back to them, we look at all the recommendations made for the past 5 years, and if the evaluator believes that something important was not done, then the program has to respond and has to explain why they didn't carry out a certain improvement. That seems fairly simple, and you can, have a bureaucratic process doing it. I always suggest that you have arbitration, that there is somebody there that is perhaps from the evaluation body, not necessarily from the other two parties, to oversee the production of this commitment. But it is a good practice, I think, and a fairly simple one. It is working for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good. This is quite exciting. We had a very interesting day. I think a very important day, one that will stay for history because we were able to launch the Eval Year. But the Eval Year comes with a very concrete commitment to continue to work together to advocate for and promote the use of evaluation. So I want to ask now the rest of the colleagues two things. One, for the ones that were in South Africa in our last conference, what has changed in terms of use of evaluation? And for everybody, the same question I just asked. What can we commit in this conference, individually or in partnership, to promote and to ensure the use of evaluation? Colleagues, I would like to pass the microphone. Somebody can help.
Merci bien. Je vous demande de prendre vos écouteurs.
Just that you pick up all your headphones,
Parce que je
please.
vais parler en français.
And we'll continue in French.
Alors, c'est vrai que j'étais d'abord au Maroc en 2009.
I was in 2009 in Morocco, and then in South Africa in 2011. In South Africa, we worked a lot on the question on the use of evaluations. And we concluded, we reached some strong conclusions. In relation to the governments, we noted, we understood that the evaluation, the results of the evaluations were necessary to take decision or make decisions for the decision-making process. And in the example of Benin, more specifically, the evaluation reports are presented at the level of the ministers' councils. And like the representative from Mexico mentioned before, in a format that is accessible to the decision makers. So it doesn't matter what is the format of the report. Is it 200 pages, 150 pages? The communication is made as an annex. The report is done as an annex with a summary on 2 pages. We received some congratulation from at the government level as we were able to present in that format the conclusions of our evaluation and our recommendations and knowledge acquired with these evaluations.
We must note also that the result of these evaluations serve to inform the decision makers, since these decision makers aren't always well informed on the evolutions of sectors and the policies that have been put into place, and they don't always know the dysfunctions that exist in these sectors, and there the evaluation reports enable them to have qualified information and data. So it is very important because it enables them to program the future interventions and measures to be taken for the policies. As to the structure in the partners, with the partners, and we have an evaluation process that enables to answer specific questions and issues for each sector that is assessed. And that is important because this is what enables to do the monitoring and follow-up and give recommendations later. So what have we done as to evaluate and assess the public policies? We have evaluated the entire process and to give all the specific elements and from the beginning to the follow-up at the end, and we have codified the entire system in a document for the national policy of evaluation that was accepted for a period of 10 years between 2012 and 2024. So you can see that this was adopted after the Johannesburg conference. So the conference led us to structure our way of thinking and our intervention, and that was very important. That's what I needed to say. And I'd like to finish by saying that the evaluation process or the use of the results of these evaluations depends strongly on the way you organize yourself on the national level and the participation of all the stakeholders in the institutional framework that is put into place. That was done in Benin and was adopted. The government now has enabled us to reinforce, to strengthen our system by creating the National Council of Evaluation. That is a structure that will help us and support us and that will statute on the quality of the evaluations that are done in Benin. So that the national policy on evaluation enables us to program our evaluations along the years, and we're now finalizing the strategic plan for evaluation for 2014 and 15, and we will present it before the end of the year to the government. And with this strategic plan, we will ask, because Benin is one of the countries that has now a policy of evaluation, and these countries, it has been said this morning that these countries need to be supported so that these policies are improved, enhanced, and implemented and approved. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour, Monsieur Mouim Mahmed du Maroc. Moi également, j'ai suivi les
Mahmed from Morocco. I was at both conferences. Before reporting what happened afterwards in my country, I have a reaction as to what was just said. Usually, there are two ways of doing evaluations. The evaluation is one thing that can be done regularly to evaluate and assess a project and put it into place. And the way the project is put into place, it needs to be done in such a way that it is easy to do the accounting. So we need several conditions. We need a legal frame. That's necessary, but it's not enough. It's not sufficient, because a lot of countries have put into place the legislation, but in practice it's not done. So to succeed to do this evaluation properly, the self-evaluation is also necessary, so that in the different department, administrative department and ministries, a culture is created. This culture needs to be really embedded in the different departments, and then we need to have a planification of these evaluation and the training of the different stakeholders, and then the access to communication and the communication of the information that needs to be available. The person who produces the information cannot do the evaluation. These are two different jobs, and these jobs are interesting and are attracting a lot of people. That has already been said, but the evaluation needs to be done by professional evaluators. You need to see also the framework. If there is no framework at the basis of the evaluation, the use of the evaluation, then the credibility of the evaluation won't be as high. So you need to have a framework at the base from the start, because usually in my country you launch a policy but you don't think before that of the basis that is required to do the evaluation. So as to my experience of the 3 conferences, I think that we are evaluating positively. We are making some progress. As to the United Nations, we have seen several actions taking place and tools put into place. We have the platform now, a learning platform, and we have the involvement in the evaluation of projects that are paid on a national level. And we have noticed that many agencies of the United Nations are simplifying in the evaluation of the programs. So they're not only doing the financing side, but they're more and more involved in the project itself. So that, for Morocco, I would say that after 2011, we have now a new constitution that has institutionalized the evaluations. We have several organisms, bodies that have been put into place, and the Tribunal the Court of Accounts is also implicated, and so we have an observatory too, and since 2011 we have reviewed the statute and adapted it consequently to evaluate the public policies. And as to the use, we produce evaluations that are submitted to the authorities and then presented to the government, heads of government and the different ministries that are concerned. We then communicate the results in the press, in the media, and so it becomes public. It's automatically public. That's what happens in Morocco, and that's my experience. That's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear, concrete. Yes, we definitely need to take a few more questions, a few more comments, but I want to ask our colleagues to be very concise so we can hear a few more, because we're running out of time. But this is a very important plenary session, so we can move to the other themes. So I would ask the colleagues to be very short and sweet.
Thank you very much. I'll be as brief as possible. I have a couple of questions which I need to direct to Agustín, actually, because Agustín described a process which seemed quite complex, and it's very important that all of us understand, because in some ways they've set a gold standard, at least Mexico has. That's the impression I come away with. 2 points, Agustín. One, in passing, you mentioned the 8-pager monitoring document, which is produced every year. Now, my understanding of an MIS system is that it's sort of online, administratively collected data, which the ministry puts online, and it's not necessarily often authenticated, validated. So the question is this data administratively collected, and how do you ensure that it's authenticated, and how do you have legitimacy if neither of those conditions are met? My second question is about the evaluations, which go from 8 pages to 500 pages. Now, inevitably, I think I was getting a sense that you're saying that the senior-most civil servants in the relevant ministry, whose program you are evaluating, will resist, because the news is not good. presumably the news is not necessarily going to be good. If the news is not good in the evaluation, then resistance is inevitable, because the bureaucrat, the whole structure of the bureaucracy knows that they know best. They designed it, they've implemented it, and now who the hell are you to telling us, coming here and telling us that, you know, okay. But your clout is probably coming from the following. Correct me if I'm wrong. I need to understand this. Your clout is coming from the fact that your law is enabling you to speak directly to Parliament. And because you don't send your evaluations to the executive, to the ministry, you send it directly to Parliament. And then it gets first discussed in Parliament. Now, if this understanding is correct, then it becomes rather similar to what we have in India in the form of the Comptroller and Auditor General report, or Auditor General's report. And the CAG is a constitutionally mandated independent body who reports directly to Parliament. Ministry doesn't come. So if there's a ruckus in Parliament about your report, then you know the senior most civil servant has to listen, no choice in the matter. You know, his back you may have stiffened his back, but the fact remains that he will have to listen. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So before I give it to Agustín, are there more questions? Well, we're going to hold on comments for just one quick round, but if there are a couple more questions before we come back to the discussants. Question? Yes?
Buenas. Marco Espinal de República Dominicana. Solo algún comentario con respecto a la pregunta.
On the question, it is the question how we can be involved as a country. And this is linked to the question asked to the panelists of what to do in order to promote the use of the evaluation. A couple of questions were mentioned. In order to summarize, it is important to raise, for example, the subject of make awareness or to sensitize the stakeholders on the importance of the evaluation, not only as a tool that is considered not as an audit, but as a tool to improve the management, as we said before, that helps to improve effectiveness of the evaluation. That is to promote workshops, capacity building, training, so that the information is spread on the importance of the evaluation. And also as to the information system, it is important, the talk by Mexico, that the report should be designed in an interesting, attractive way and friendly, so that the information reaches the involved stakeholders. Maybe annexes should work as a complement, but it is important to design the information in an interesting and attractive way. This is just to summarize. And yes, it is a commitment that we might assume to work on capacity building and training, and also to contribute to improve the information system, to make them more friendly.
We're running out of time, but I want to make sure, is it a question or comment? So let me go back to, pregunta, okay. No pregunte.
Sí, buenas tardes. Yo voy a ser muy breve. En un sistema...
Yes, very briefly. In a national evaluation system, it is important to consider to evaluate the evaluators. Is that possible? And who is going to evaluate the evaluators? This is also important.
That was one of the last questions of the last conference, but I think I'm not going to be the one to answer, of course, but I want to give the chance back to our discussants, and then we can do a quick another round of very brief comments, because I can't take much of your time today, because I know some of you have plans for dinner and a sightseeing, and you should have to leave soon, but let me see what we can hear from our discussants very quickly.
Thank you very much. As you may imagine, I left out most of our system. I was just concentrating in the last part, and that will always give rise to some misunderstandings. But you're sitting next to the person that managed the operation of the system to start with, and so she can answer some things. But I would like to say that yes, our yearly evaluation system, the simplest one that we have, is based on online information, but not only. Because, number one, evaluators are not just people who look at online information and put it down. They have to be well-known academics in the field of that evaluation. And so they bring with them enough skepticism to look at that information. And secondly, these yearly evaluations also sum up all the knowledge that people have about those programs and all the knowledge, all the information that has been provided by past independent evaluations. So if these two things collide, then you have a problem, and we have had problems very often, which basically means we have to look more carefully at the information before that evaluation is published. So there are some checking mechanisms, and they work. I'm sure they don't always work, but they work a lot of the time. And I think I'll just stop there. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Guess none of them wanted to answer the question about who evaluates the evaluator, but we're going to come back to this at some point during the conference for sure. Yes, okay. We can take two comments, final comments. Anybody?
I think having short, standardized reports is a wonderful idea, and compliment both of you who brought that up. But of course, as we demonstrate at the conference, dialogue is another way of getting people to become interested in something or use it. And so I know that you're not asking for a question, but a comment, but perhaps in tomorrow's sessions, I'd like to hear more about whether results are presented orally or in different formats, and if so, who they're presented to. Because in the United States, in program evaluation and program evaluation work I do, it is relatively easy to talk with the program managers or the CEO of a program, but our program deliverers, but more difficult to talk to policymakers. And so perhaps written is better than oral. But I just think that we have to think of many different ways of communication tailored to the audience, to think about ways to bring about use. Thank you.
I want here to raise some comments about the cost of evaluation in the mechanism, the overall mechanism of planning and implementation. As our colleague from Kenya has said that the target should be to save 1% of the budget to evaluation. And from the side of policymakers and the implementation, the question of time of evaluation, the question of cost of evaluation must be a big concern so that evaluation can be accepted to be used in the cycle of planification and implementation. I think that is a very critical question. For example, this rate is it calculated according to the investment budget or to the running costs? Because the question is, if one can broaden the system of evaluation to be heavy, it will be also increase or raise, I can say, the budget commit or involving in running costs. And this will be frightening the politicians. That is one. As the question of time, to be bound to time is also critical. That is an element that I want to raise here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have, of course, time is very short. I'm sure we could have a lot more questions and comments, and some of these questions are going to very interesting ways, and we should come back to it. Of course, your question and the question about who evaluates the evaluators, and we should come back, because even though we're going to move into credibility and independence, I think this affects use credibility and independence. So we'll definitely have to come back to the questions. We are short in time. Thank you very much. But before I close, I want to apologize on behalf of Paulo Januzzi, our secretary from the Ministry of Social Development in Brazil. He couldn't come back. As he mentioned here, they have launched some very important document today, and he's been getting calls from the minister all day. But he will be here. The next couple of days we'll be able to engage with him a bit more. Before I close, I would like to mention that there is a bus leaving for dinner at a barbecue place, a very traditional barbecue Brazilian restaurant. And then after that, you go for a night sightseeing. If you want to participate, you can look for travel a la carte, the outside. I also want to ask, there's another dinner tomorrow night as well, and that is dinner, it's at 7 o'clock, the bus will leave tonight. Tomorrow we'll have a dinner here at the hotel with a Brazilian show, a very interesting samba show. So we are all invited to join us. Yes, a dinner and a show. And I ask Val partners, the advisory board, the moderators and facilitators to stay for a bit longer so we can have a wrap up. But other than that, thank you very much. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp. Thank you.